welcome. My name is Mario Vitale, and this is Molto Mario. I'm here with my good friends Adam, John, and Priscilla, and we're going to talk about a little bit about Italian cooking. More specifically, we're going to talk about the cooking of Rome, and even more specifically than that, we're going to talk about the style of food that's a little bit more robust. We're calling this show the Cart Driver's Dinner. And in fact, if you're familiar with the Appian Way, one of the oldest roads leading out of Rome, down towards Naples and the incredible coast along the Amalfi area, where even the rich in the times of the Romans used to keep their houses by the seaside, the road called the Appian Way is one of the most incredibly visual things that you'll ever see because of its incredible fertility. The ground and the terra between Rome and Naples is one of the most incredible garden areas, and where a lot of great things grew, including animals, but vegetables, produce, and even wine were three of the most important things that grew there. The dishes, of course, are a little bit more robust, so we're going to start off with an antipasto called Polpettine di Vitello. Now, if you've ever had meatballs in America, generally because we're such a rich culture, we tend to make our meatballs out of 100% meat. Well, that, for me, has always been a problem, because what it yields is something that's too firm and too hard. It's not tasty, it's not succulent. It's good, it's okay, it's got good flavor, but the way that they've used it historically in Rome, in the cooking of Rome more specifically, is they'll stretch the meat out with something that cost them a little bit less or was a little bit easier to find. Invariably, that started with bread, but in this case, we're starting with someone who had also sheep. So we're going to take veal and ricotta and make these incredibly delicious meatballs. Now, the first thing is we take ground veal. You could just as easily use ground pork or ground beef. It doesn't make a difference. You could even use chopped leftover roast beef or ham. The whole idea behind the frugality of the Italian culture is that you never throw anything away, and that's how come some of these recipes seem to come derivatively toward the table, but in fact, that's why they became, because they weren't going to throw anything away. And that's the culture that leads to great flavors, understanding that you would never throw anything away. You wouldn't buy a pig, cut out the pork chops, and throw everything else away. You're going to use the tail, the ears, the snout, the heart, the liver, the kidneys, everything, the whole animal, and that's one of the great things about Italian culture, and one of the things that's very different in the times of America the rich here at the end of the Clinton administration. Now we have to see if we can understand how to actually use and save things, right? So we've got our veal, and that's about a pound, and we're going to take ricotta. Now there's ricotta that you buy in the grocery stores is actually a pretty good product. If you could find something freshly made, it's even better. But the stuff that we get in American grocery stores is actually very good. It's a cow's milk ricotta. Traditionally in Rome, you would have used a sheep's milk ricotta. The way to get this texture is by taking it and putting it in cheesecloth, and then putting the cheesecloth inside of a colander and allowing it to drain. And a lot of the kind of liquidy whey stuff drips out. And that's what you want to do when you want to make something like this. If you want to serve it as a dessert, you wouldn't want to drain it. You like that kind of moisture content that it has in it. And eventually, a lot of times you'll see that ricotta itself is served as a dessert in Italy. Just drizzle with a little honey and serve with some nuts or a little bit of bread. Now what we're going to do is we're going to season this with just a little bit of salt and pepper. Then we're going to add one of my favorite ingredients, and something that is certainly a holdback from the old times. Even in the Renaissance, as recently as the Renaissance, Roman food was very famous for mixing sweet and salt, particularly in the main courses or the meat courses. So what you've got to look out for is strange spices. A lot of times you'll see cinnamon or nutmeg, even in the meat dishes. And in fact, this one has nutmeg. Now, of course, in my opinion, nutmeg has a great affinity with ricotta. It makes something that's just more than the combination of the two, more than the sum of the two ingredients. It becomes something truly incredible. So we're going to be pretty heavy with the nutmeg.
Mario.
Yes.
I have a question.
Ask it.
How much do you use the nutmeg? I mean, how much do you put in? Because it's a very powerful thing, and sometimes it can be overbearing.
Well, I would say we used about a third of that nut right there.
Wonderful.
So that would probably be closer to about a half a teaspoon maybe when it's all grated. One of the things you got to remember when you're buying nutmeg, don't ever buy pre-ground nutmeg, because you're never sure of how much wood chips or broken broom handles are in there. So always buy the whole thing and grate it just like that. So we've got about 1.5 cups of the drained ricotta. We're going to take about a ½ cup of Parmigiano Reggiano or Pecorino Romano. Parmigiano Reggiano, of course, being the indisputed king of cheeses. Pecorino is actually the jack, because Gorgonzola, in my opinion, is the queen of cheeses. Wouldn't you know a little bit about that?
Absolutely.
So now we're going to add 2 eggs, and what the eggs are going to do is serve to bind it. If you put too many eggs in, what you'd find is that the meatballs or the polpettine became too firm. But we want them to be able to hold together. So now we're just going to blend this together. And you're going to see it's not really going to look a lot like meatballs that you're familiar with. It's going to look a little creamy, a little white, and yet relatively soft. And in fact, that's what we want, because we're trying to serve something relatively succulent. Now, just to get you guys' hands ready, what we're going to do is form meatballs ourselves. And as a matter of fact, There you go, Priscilla. Let's see if you can work it out. Each one of those little blobs should make about 2 meatballs. We're not looking for them to be too big. In fact, something about along the lines of this. Don't be afraid of it. Come on, get in there.
It's a natural moisturizer.
Exactly, it's a natural moisturizer. Then we're just going to dust it in the flour like so. And then they're ready to go. Now what I've done here is I've heated up extra virgin olive oil off on the side, because that's our lipid of choice when we're cooking in and around Rome. We made a few more earlier so we could get ahead, and what we're just going to do is dust them through the flour. Go ahead and toss them into the flour bin there, yeah, guys? Guys and Priscilla, pardon me.
How many times do you dust it? Like, I think,
Just once in, and that's it. You don't want too much off. And then, in fact,
like
so that the excess flour doesn't burn in the oil, I'm going to actually throw them in my hand just one more time right before they go in. So it's like this, and then they just start going in. 1, 2. Now keep in mind, they're not going to be big round meatballs. They're going to be kind of like saucer-shaped meatballs. And the trick is to cook them all the way through. So you want to make sure that your pan, this isn't a deep fry. This is more like a saute. So we're going to crowd the pan quite a bit compared to if we were going to fry them. If we were frying, on the other hand, we would probably stop right here, because when you put too much in the pan, you crowd it, and it tends to lower the heat of the oil.
Mario, I have a question.
Yes.
In regards to like braising and browning, I was making Osso Bucco the other day. Do you always use flour to braise something?
Well, that's a good question that you're asking right now, because in fact, we're about to make the Osso Bucco right here. And in fact, I'm not going to at all use any flour at all, because I don't want to add any crust to that. So I'm just going to season it quite aggressively. And this is called an Osso Bucco or a Stinco. Stinco is what we call it when it's whole. And what we're going to do is just put it in here, and we're going to brown it aggressively, because, of course, that's the difference between home cooking and restaurant cooking, that we take our time to give it that deep, dark golden brown, which is going to eventually yield to us a very caramelized flavor, which is something that we're looking for in terms of building the layers of flavor. When we come back, we'll show you how these meatballs are coming out. We'll continue on with the Stinco. So please, stay with us at home. Welcome back. Now we've got our little polpettine frying here, and in fact, they're just done. Stop touching the guanciale, Priscilla.
I can't help myself.
I know, it looks really good. We're going to eat it in our next course. Now the polpettine are done. We're just removing them, dusting them just a little bit, but in fact, these are never going to be cooked in tomato sauce. We've actually cooked them in the miraculous oil. If you're familiar with the Roman culture, of course, the Jewish ghetto plays a large part of it, as is most important, perhaps, the miracle of Hanukkah, the miracle of the oil, when the oil lasted much longer than they thought. Yes?
Is the cured pig, is that part of the miracle of Hanukkah also?
No, that isn't. This dish, however, is. And what we're going to do is just serve this up with a touch of tomato sauce over the top. There's a large culture of frying in Rome, as there is a lot in a lot of parts of Italy. But in Rome, we're using extra virgin olive oil, and that's one of the things that I exhort people to try. If you're going to do a little deep frying at home, always use extra virgin olive oil. Not the most expensive one, but a very simple one, because what it adds is an incredible flavor that you'd never guess why something tastes so good. But if you've ever had carciofi alla Judea, the fried artichokes of Rome, it's one of the great dishes you'll ever try. Now this comes to the table like so, and then we just tear a little bit of basil by hand. Now, a lot of times what you'll notice when you see Italian moms cook or grandmas cook, they're not necessarily down at the chopping board like this with a bad attitude. What you'll see is if they're chopping or cutting something, they'll then generally cut over the table like this, over a bowl, or they'll even just tear it with their hands. And that's because they don't mind smelling like the ingredients they're using. And in fact, what could be better than a little bit of torn basil? It makes the whole kitchen smell good. And torn tastes a little bit different than just plain sliced up. If you guys would like to add them, go ahead and serve a couple up for everybody. Pass them around and get tasted. Now, our next dish is what's called a Stinco di Vitello. The difference between Stinco and Osso Bucco is nothing other than the fact that the Stinco is definitely usually braised whole. Osso Bucco is cut laterally across this way to yield pieces that have the hole. And in fact, Osso Bucco means bone with the hole. Well, this is the whole thing, and the marrow's still inside there, and it's still a delicious component of it. You have to give them a little fork so they can get down and get the marrow out of the bone, which is one of the most delicious things.
My favorite part.
The thing that we're going to do now is create a braise, and of course you're familiar with braising. Braising is cooking something in a liquid that doesn't completely cover it, but actually comes up to about its shoulders. It then takes something that's actually very firm and hard and sinuous, like this shank, which is actually the lower part of the leg of the animal, and it just makes it completely succulent. And it's the sinew and the gelatin in there that's going to make this meat entirely different. Go ahead, eat up, guys. Don't wait.
Mario, if you're cooking with olive oil, how do you stop your kitchen from filling up with smoke?
Well, you need a really good hood system, or you just buy you know, like a papal palace out in Rome, which has just giant open windows to the fields.
Right.
Now, what we're going to do is cut up to make our braising liquid, and generally, it starts with something like this. In Rome, the traditional, most important aromatic is celery, so you'll see celery and mint in a lot of the dishes. We're going to take the carrots and celery, as well as onion, and toss them in here. I didn't put a lot of oil in there, so I don't have to drain it out. We like the flavor of that. One of the most important steps in making this dish is understanding that those little dark brown bits that are stuck there to the bottom of the pan are really what you're looking for. We like that. We want that flavor there. That's what's, again, very much like the browning, the intense level of browning that we want to do. That's going to give us that incredible caramelized depth of flavor, as opposed to something that was just cooked light golden brown. The dark golden brown. How are those meatballs anyway, guys?
Great. Okay, one for Mario, I have a question.
Yes, please.
Now, you're using red onion. Can you use a white Spanish onion instead as well?
Of course, but the Italians tend to use whatever onions in season. And as a matter of fact, the Italians have an incredible propensity to grow a lot of their own ingredients. And in fact, down this beautiful Via Appia, the Appian Way, which leads south out of Rome, every acre, every micro acre is something that's been translated into a garden or for someone's use. And even the farmers who just work the land for someone else often enough have their own little acre and a half where they grow their onions, their salad, their tomatoes, and their peppers. Now, what I'm adding to this braise is anchovies. We buy salted anchovies. We take the fillets off, rinse them with water, and then soak them in milk for a little while. It doesn't add a seafoody flavor. What it adds is this intangible, almost saltiness to it, which is an incredible another layer when we're talking about adding depth of flavor. So now we're going to saute those vegetables just a little bit. We're going to throw in 2 great herbs. We're going to throw them in whole, and then we're going to pull them out. A little sage and a little marjoram. And then we're going to create our braising liquid by using a little white wine.
Mario, what do you do if you can't get fresh herbs and you have to use the dry herbs? Is that
if you couldn't get fresh herbs because for some reason you lived in the Yukon, then I would suggest that you use dry, but you just don't use as many. A tablespoon of dry herbs equals about a bunch. We're going to add about a cup of basic tomato sauce, and then we're going to put the Stinco back in there. We're going to bring the whole thing up to a boil. We're going to cover it. Then we're going to lower the heat to the simmer and allow it to go for about 2 hours. The next dish we're going to make is called spaghetti alla Carretera. And the first thing we're going to use is this guanciale. I'm going to get it started. When we come back, I'll explain to you exactly what guanciale is and then go through the whole dish. So please stay with us. Welcome back. How are those meatballs, fellas? It looks like they worked out pretty good, huh?
Wonderful.
You never tasted cheese in them.
No, you wouldn't. Well, the cheese almost takes on the texture of the meat. Takes on the dreams of the people who slept there before. Oh! And all the girls had names that sounded like donuts. Anyway, enough of my favorite hero, Tom Waits. Those are a perfect appetizer. Now we're talking about the Cartsman's dinner with my good friends Adam, John, and Priscilla here. And we're going to make now one of the great pastas of this region, which is called spaghetti alla Carrettiera, in the Cartsman style. And imagine the Cartsman is the person that goes down the Via Appia and back into town where he lives to bring either the vegetables or the Piazza Navona. So there's always, and meat and cheese. So the Cartsman's truck is always full. So there's, of course, a good amount of great things going on in this dish. The first one is that guanciale, which I just put in there. The guanciale is the national pork product of Rome. It's basically the guanciale is this. You are getting sleepy. Yes, Porky Pig is in your dreams.
Just put it on my plate. I'll eat it like that.
No.
It's
This is actually the pork jowl cured very much like pancetta, like our American bacon. It has a very distinct flavor. If you couldn't find it in America, you'd want to certainly substitute pancetta. If you couldn't find it, a smoky, really well-done bacon, a home-cured bacon, as opposed to the big national brands would be something. People also eat this raw in Italy. It's a great product. Would you care to give it a little taste?
Yes.
This is one that we make ourselves at the Italian wine merchants. I have a little salumeria in back, and it's actually... This is the this is the L-I-T-E.
Like me.
Guanciale light. Now, we've got a little bit of garlic going on in here. We're going to add 2 kinds of porcini. Because the cartsman's always going to have the first choice, we're going to take some fresh porcini mushrooms, which are called ceps in French. And they're called porcini because they look like little pigs. If you see them here, they've got their little caps. And if this was hole in the ground, it would look just like that. Just a little chubby guy. It's got an incredible flavor. They're around in the late spring and in the early fall when it's really moist and yet still kind of warm out. And they're incredible. Fresh porcinis are a little expensive. Dry porcinis are even more expensive, but still absolutely delicious. So we're using both in this because I love the texture of the dry. The dry almost have this kind of meat component to their flavor as well as to their texture. What you do when you buy the dry, which look like this, is you just pour hot water over them and allow them to soak for about 15 minutes, just like a tea. Then you drain them out like this, and you use that water because that water has the same kind of rich infusion of flavor. So we're going to use that at the end of this sauce after we add our tomato. So we're going to take some dried porcini, and we're going to toss them all in there together. The fresh porcini, the soaked dry porcini, and then we're not going to add very much salt to this because we have the guanciale in it. And this also, the dried porcini have almost what is perceived on the palate as almost a salty flavor. So you got to be careful when you're using this in things. Now we're going to take canned tomatoes. In Italy, fresh tomatoes are pretty much only used in sauces in August, September, and October. Other than that, they're using what they call pelati, which is the kind that they make themselves. They'll harvest all their tomatoes at the peak of the season. They'll blanch them for a second, peel off their skins, and then put them in with just a little bit of juice and maybe a little bit of basil, and then put them in jars just like Americans do their pickles. And this is one of the things that really distinguishes each house. You know, our pelati are better than your pelati. And one of the great things about Italian culture and their natural hospitality is that they value things that are handmade, or home cured, or home done, over anything you could buy at even the most expensive of stores. It's much more important to get a gift of a homemade salami than an entire prosciutto made somewhere else. And that's really what they value the most, is that made at home, by hand kind of thing. Now when we use these, what?
You want the whole tomatoes?
You buy the whole tomatoes because you know that there's nothing else in there. And also you get the whole flavor, all the acidity, all the little bit of seeds, and I even like the seeds, so it's not a problem for me. Then what you do is you crush them by hand. We never put these in a food processor. It totally wrecks that rusticity that we're looking for. Then you just drain them and in to the pan with the guanciale. Now tell me that doesn't smell like someone you want to live with, guys.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Nothing says I love you like a homemade salami.
There you go. You are so right, Priscilla. There is absolutely nothing going on there that couldn't be truer. Now we're going to toss this through, and it's going to actually look pretty thick. What we're going to do to thin that down is take a little bit of the water from the porcini and drain it in there. Then we're just going to toss it through and allow it to cook. Now this isn't a long cook sauce, but what it does need is a few minutes, probably about as long as it takes to cook the spaghetti. What I'm going to add right now is to give it a little tiny jolt of chilies, and then at the end I'm going to teach you a little lesson about how to use chilies at the last second, because that's going to make something, an entirely different world of texture and flavor. This, of course, is going to be with spaghetti. The most important thing, however, is that it's dried pasta. You wouldn't want to use tagliatelle or fettuccine made from egg pasta. This is durum wheat pasta, which is hard. It's only made with wheat and flour, and it has a particular way of dancing in a sauce like this that makes absolute sense. So we're going to toss this in here. When we come back, I'll show you how to bring the spaghetti alla Carretera together, and then we'll finish up the Stinco, and the whole world will be living on the Via Appia, the Appian way. So please stay with us. Welcome back. Now we've got our pasta drained here, and as we always know, because we watch a lot of Molto Mario, we take it out about 30 seconds early. We toss it in with the condiment. Careful not to call it sauce. We toss it in there and through there so that it's going to be dressed just like a salad. And we don't want it to be too loose, but we don't want it to be too tight. We want it to be just perfectly dressed. And in fact, at this point, I'm going to add a little bit more of those hot pepper flakes, because if you add them in the sauce, it makes the whole sauce spicy. If you add them at the last second, it makes individual bites a little bit more picante than other individual bites. So now I'm going to take a little bit of parsley, toss it through, turn off the heat, add a drizzle of extra virgin olive oil, and take it to the plate, guys. And as you can tell, you don't even really have to taste this if you don't want to, guys, because you know it's not going to be any good.
Why wouldn't we want to?
Smell that. Adam, if you could put a little grated Parmigiano Reggiano on that, and then go ahead and serve it up to the fellas.
Fellas?
Now, you don't want to put too much cheese. Well, we've got 3 fellas, 2 fellas, a fella and a half. You never know. Priscilla, you're just knocking them dead. Now, we've got our Stinco there. Don't put too much cheese on. Just a little bit more, all the way out to the edge. But the whole idea behind good Italian cooking is that it's balanced, and you want to taste all of the ingredients. So many times, Italian people or Italian Americans come into, not Italian people, Italian Americans come into the restaurant, get their pasta, and they cover it with an entire snow of Parmigiano Reggiano. That means that they're really only going to taste the Parmigiano, which isn't a bad flavor, but it's not anything, go ahead, serve it up. It's not anything that takes a great deal of effort to make. So when you're putting cheese on your pasta, make sure everyone understands that it is just about balance. Our Stinco's been braising here, and it's looking absolutely perfect, falling off the bone, as it were. We're going to put it on top of this bed of just sautéed spinach. We're going to take a little bit of the sauce, again, not all of it, just enough to kind of go over the top and dress it. And then over the top of that, we're going to make a little bit of gremolata by putting some parsley over the top, a little bit of grated lemon zest, and then we're going to take some of that original herb that we put in there, the marjoram, and sprinkle it over the top because we're looking to get that beautiful flavor spectrum. The cooked marjoram that's in there already, and a little bit of the raw marjoram over at the last second. I want to thank you guys for being here. It's been a good time. I want to thank you guys for being here because you're all Roman to me. Please join me again on the next Molto Mario. Ciao.